in 2 days, it's all clear that there are various forms of intellectual property. And usually, when you're an author or you have an idea as a developer, you have brilliant ideas which first you share with friends. Is it visible at the back? You have brilliant ideas that you share with friends, you share with developers, other artists, and with idea hawks. If you go to the iHub and to the iLab, and you're sharing your ideas freely, as James mentioned, there are people who will latch onto your idea and quickly try and put it through the IP regime to make it their own. The other thing you might do, if you loop this second bit, is to try and go to lawyers. But this circuit usually ends in this cyclic fashion, right? And you end at that one there. You see that one called frustration? Usually that will happen. Then when that happens, you could go there. Do you know that place? Because things are not going very well. Or if you're Catholic, you could go there, right? But most Kenyans will go there. You know this place? And if you're very posh, you go there. This is Galleria, I think, on a strange evening out. But with most intellectual property that has a technological bent, this is the place I would advise any developer to go. Because CIPIT, the Kenya Industrial Property Institute, I have the advantage to speak after you have met the MD and you have met the Chief Patent Examiner, David Njuguna. It should be the obvious place to go if you think you have something technological that you have invented and you want to protect. Of course, the substance of our conference this week, the last 2 days, has been the issue whether software is patentable at all. And I'm not sure it's clear in your minds whether software is patentable at all, is it? Do you have a conclusive answer whether software is patentable at all? Do you even have a notion about which way Kenyan law should proceed in the matter of software patentability? I know that as a center, we are conscious to advise people who come to us for advice, and we've not been on the ground for very long, that if you're a young developer at iLab is just behind us here, you're better off investing time developing a mark or registering a mark, working with a copyright, and building a brand, which is what Dr. Felix Martin talked about in the morning. But at CIPIT, if you're thinking about intellectual property regimes and what to protect, the things you can protect at CIPIT is you can get a trademark registration. Now everybody knows what trademarks are, because this thing here, Google, is a registered trademark. So if you're trying to build a brand, you've got to register a trademark. Patents have been the subject of our seminar over the last 2 days, and patents are obviously technical things. Isaac is a patent drafter, and if you have something other than a software innovation, I would readily say, let's patent this. I think the overriding theme has been patents are good. Patents are especially good if you're trying to register them outside of Kenya, because you can monetize, because you commercialize better, because you draw attention to yourself, right? So the other thing that you can get at CIPIT are industrial designs, utility models, and traditional knowledge. Now, this last bit, traditional knowledge, is interesting because I don't think any of you who came here have thought about traditional knowledge as a form of knowledge. Now, because the mics are down there, I want to know who has any idea what traditional knowledge is. That traditional knowledge is linked to one other thing that CIPIT is trying to protect. Correct me if I'm wrong, geographic indications, right? Geographic indications. Now, some of you will have heard what geographic indications are. Some of you know some geographic indications. Most of you have heard of the wine called champagne, no? Some of you will have heard of the cheese called camembert, not so. Some of you will obviously know of the thing called tequila, isn't it? Now, these are geographical indications of countries. One, Camembert of France, Champagne of France as well, north of Strasbourg, and Tequila of Mexico. Now, these are areas, as Kenya goes county, that you will find geographical indications are products that derive their unique qualities from the areas in which they are produced, right? Of course, the things that will come readily to mind, you might think, are what? Kenyan tea, Kenyan coffee, maybe. This Maasai sheep that we get from Kiserian. I mean, if you have ever eaten New Zealand lamb, it's supposed to be sold as this ultra soft lamb because it is harvested and farmed a certain way in New Zealand, right? So there are possibilities when you are thinking, some of you are thinking about retiring and you will run farms, and these are ways in which your farms and the things you're producing in your farms could link directly with intellectual property. So think vastly about the area of traditional knowledge, because Africa is rich in it, and Kenya is rich in it in particular, and link that to the idea of geographic indications. So when you think CIPIT and you think intellectual property, the things that should spring to your mind are trademarks, patents, industrial designs, utility models, traditional knowledge, and geographic indications. Moving on. Now, if you go to this website of CIPIT, you will find the forms for filling out a patent, right? I think you saw from Dr. Rottenberg what a patent looks like, right? If you look at the form at CIPIT, you even see what the fees are, you see the act and the regulations. Now, a lot of us have an extended discussion about patents and intellectual property protection, and we have never read the act. Of course, I think there is a conception amongst Kenyans that acts are for lawyers to read, isn't it? Right? Acts and regulations are for lawyers to read. But to be fair, the acts as they are drafted, certainly as they are drafted circa 2001 and 2002, they're very accessible to ordinary people. When I read law at the law school, there was a fellow there teaching legislative drafting, and he was telling us that we've got to come off this idea that lawyers have to communicate in an oblique, abstract language. The point of legislation is to communicate. So if you're looking for information about intellectual property and patents and trademarks, the regulation, the information, the law is the act. And you can find that at the website of CIPIT. Now, I say these things because before we decide to take on lawyers, before we decide to take on any sort of intellectual property advice, you should try and gather the basic information that's accessible to you. If you've got an internet connection, go online and try and find out this thing that I want to protect, under what regime would it fall, right? Now, of course, if you have a bit of money to throw around, right, or you don't have an internet connection, you could use these fellows. Do you know who these fellows are? Shakespeare describes them as knaves, rascals, eater of broken meats, base, proud, shallow, beggarly, three-suited, 100-pound, and Carol Maura does not look anything like this. Filthy, worsted, shocking knave, lily-livered, action-taking knaves, right? Now, John Gray says, I know you lawyers can with ease twist words and meanings as you please, that language by your skill made pliant will bend to favor every client, that 'tis the fee that directs the sense to make out these sides pretense. I'm sorry, this is what my students have to live through. Because I should have been a literature student. Anyhow, now, if it's technological, then the place to go is CIPIT, right? If it's an industrial design, if it's a utility model, the place to go is CIPIT. You saw the MD here, you saw Mr. Njogona, who's a chief patent examiner. If it's copyright, the place to go is Kekobo. Again, Maricela Uma was here. Now, what things are protectable by copyright law? Off the bat, it's clear that software is protectable by copyright, right? Now, the problem with computer software and copyright is this, as will have become apparent over the last 2 days. Copyright protects the text. Copyright does not protect the functionality. And that's why we're in this muddle, talking endlessly over 2 days about what are we going to do about it. Now, even though it's not clear that you can protect functionality with patents, right? Certainly in Kenya it's not. You should at least protect the code that you do have with copyright. It costs 1,000 shillings to register your copyright. So before, and as he asked about his students, before you go off writing code for anyone, make sure it's registered with the Kenya, with Kekobo. Now, copyright subsists, exists automatically once you have written the code. Automatically. For it to be actionable, for you to be able to sue anyone, you've got to have registered it. Are we together? Now, copyright only subsists if the thing you are trying to protect in 4 categories, if it is musical, if it is literary, if it is artistic, or it is an audiovisual work, or is a sound recording or a broadcast, is original, right? Now, I shan't go into what things the law deems original, but original means essentially that you have not copied it from someone else. It also has to be fixed in a tangible form. So when you're thinking, this thing of mine, what do I do with it? Where do I go? It's Kekobo if it's musical, it's literary, it's artistic, it's an audiovisual work, it's a sound recording, and if it's a broadcast. It's got to be fixed in material form. That means if it's in your head, you have no copyright. If it's not fixed somewhere, you have no copyright. And if you haven't registered it, sorry, right? Now, under Kekobo, you have collective management organizations. In Kenya, we've got 4. These are the people who manage copyright for these people. You know about the Music Copyright Society of Kenya? Do you know these people? They are the ones who harass matatu operators are telling them, you've got to pay for your sticker for 2,500 shillings. Do you know those people? Those guys are called MCSK. They recently had an election, right? And some musicians were voted in as members of the board. Do you remember? Now, if you're an aspiring musician, and some of you students are, if you ever make a song that I can listen to, right, and that hits acclaim, what happens with the Music Copyright Society is that they have logs where they identify how well your song is doing. And they take that song and through a formula that they've got, they distribute the monies that they've collected from restaurants and from these public service vehicles, and they distribute that money at the end of the year. So this collective body that's administering royalties for you, if you're a half-good musician, or even a bad musician, but as long as you're getting airplay, there will be something coming to you at the end of the year. So if you're in music, MCSK is people you should know. Are we together? Now, the Kenya Reproduction Rights Organization, COPICAN, I've gone there. I'm not sure what they do, right? But I know where they are. I know what their logo does. And the less said about that, the better, right? The Kenya Association of Music Producers, again, this is related to music, related to production and distribution of royalties as well. The Performance Rights Organization of Kenya, these people are very well connected with what goes on at Alliance Francaise. I have had very little of them since they were registered as a collecting body, but I am interested to find out more about what is going on there. Now, so if your idea is creative, if it's literary, if it's musical, if it's a broadcast, then you're talking to Kekobo, you're talking to the collecting bodies, or you're thinking about the Creative Commons licenses. Now, Joseph, who came 2 speakers before me, or speaker before me, spoke about these 6 licenses of the Creative Commons movement. And the idea of the Creative Commons licenses is that we shouldn't, is not that we shouldn't propertize copyright, right? Is that authors or creators of original artistic works or literary works should have the liberty to decide what it is they want to do with the work they have created. The book that he showed you by Lessig, I was able to get on a Creative Commons license, the CC license, I was able to get, and the idea is distribute the book, all right? Let people read. The book that you read by Miguna, how many of you have the hard copy? Miguna's book, how many of you have the hard copy? On a show of hands. This show is not recorded, right? And even if it were, at least that bit is not recorded. How many of you have the hard copy? 1, 2. How many of you have had access to the PDF? Thank you. And this is an intellectual property conference. So we were having this at the breakout meeting yesterday. I was having this discussion with some people at the table, and I asked, so what do you want? Is it more beneficial for Miguna for the book to have been bought, again, show of hands, people with hardcover, 1, 2, or to be bought by, or to have been read by people with PDF? Yes, the vast majority of you, even those who are now shy on round 2 of putting up their hands, yeah? When you think about the ends of copyright, and we say that one of the reasons we've got copyright law at all is to incentivize further knock-on innovation, right? And I don't know who released the book by Miguna to us, because I have the PDF version. And I was saying yesterday, I read 10 pages every day, right? It's a sort of, after you read the Bible, then you read Miguna's book and you laugh a bit, right? Some of the tales in the Bible can be very sad. So the question is, do you think Miguna has been helped at all by this book being readily available as a free PDF? So if Miguna's intent was to get read in Kenya, that copyright would not be serving him, because there are only 2 people who would have read that book. Perhaps the book would have been serialized, right? But if the book was to distribute the knowledge, right, then the PDF and the widespread availability has served his ends, right? Now, under general copyright, that would not be possible. Under the Creative Commons license, what has happened to Miguna's book would have been possible, right? Now, of course, if you're involved in artistic production, you intend various purposes for your work, yeah? Some of you want to derive money. Some of you want to be lionized, right? So that everybody has read your book. Again, in that breakout meeting yesterday, I asked the question, because somebody who was here, who's a lawyer, has a father who was in music many years ago. And he was a famous musician. In fact, I listened to his music because my father used to play the music. So what happened was that a friend of the father's took the music and began to sell it in the US, right? And the music was widely popular in the US amongst a certain ethnic group from Kenya, right? So when they meet to reminisce of Nyama Choma and Tusker, they would play this music, right? So the father hears this story that this music of yours is widely popular in America, but you are starving here in Kenya, right? And the father was very angry, and he said, now I am a die-hard copyright enforcer, and I believe in copyright. And although I think that it's true that to infringe the copyright of the father in that jurisdiction in America is a crime, right? I asked myself, had there been no value created, right, that could have been exploited if the dad had gone on tour in America? Because for sure, you can pirate the music, but you cannot pirate the individual, isn't it? Right? I pirate, before I was a copyright law teacher, I used to pirate music that I could not afford. Even now, I tell my students that when I went to watch The Dark Knight, and I know they can't afford it, I'd let them watch the 50-shilling movies, and then later, when they are successful lawyers, they can start going to the movies and the cinemas. The question is there no knock-on benefit? Is there no knock-on benefit, if you think about it, for the market to have been created, right, by the piracy, right? So that when you come on board as a musician, it happens in Tanzania, it happens in Nollywood. When you come on board as a musician, right, there is a ready market. Am I communicating, right? So I have found, when I looked at Nollywood and I looked at Bollywood, I realized these markets, they don't run on copyright, right? Copyright exists, but they don't run on it. In fact, from the breakout meeting as well yesterday, somebody told me that in Nollywood, they will produce the movie and then hand it to the pirates. Are we together? And the pirates will pay money up front, right? So once the pirates get it, they distribute it, because it's hard to steal from the pirates. The pirates know who the pirates are, all right? And then the music is distributed. So as a producer, Nigeria, your movie is produced in 2 days flat, right? 1.5, and on your 3rd day, you're stepping above budget, right? So at day 2, the movie is ready and you distribute it. So in a month, you've done 15 movies, right? In fact, the pirates can't keep up with the pace of production. Are we together? So Creative Commons could work in this way in Kenya, because by releasing some of your material free, right? By releasing some of your material free, and this is something Joseph alluded to, when you release it free, you create a market for it, right? If you remember, when DSTV first came to Kenya, for about 3 or 4 months, we got free-to-air channels. Do you remember? At least I remember watching cartoons endlessly. And then when it was switched off and I could not see, I wondered what had happened. So there is one sense in which you've got to think, if you're in the creative industries, do you want to create a market first before you propertize? All right? So Creative Commons. So if you're producing here, ask yourself, do I go copyright? Do I go copyleft? Do I go Creative Commons? As somebody mentioned, so Victor at the back, he said, CIPIT might be interested. I don't know. This will be discussed at a CIPIT meeting. CIPIT might be interested in becoming an agent for Creative Commons. But I think it's a good thing to have in this jurisdiction. So that is, yes, another option, lying next in line to Kekobo, right? And copyright registration. All right. Now, obviously, with CC, you don't need to register. And then if you go online, you will see, what are they called? Those 6 licenses of Creative Commons. Now, Creative Commons was started by this guy called Lawrence Lessig. He's a prolific writer. Many books, one of them Remix, the other one called Free Culture, the other one called The Future of Ideas that Joseph had here. I suggest you write those down, and then we begin to break our culture of not reading books and just reading newspapers. I'll repeat that list of books again. The Future of Ideas, Lawrence Lessig. Free Culture, Lawrence Lessig, and Remix, Lawrence Lessig, right? Now, if you're considering taking on lawyers, and dealing with your intellectual property, you'll find that Kenyan lawyers are not as specialized. East African lawyers, African lawyers, they're not as specialized as to call themselves. They're not as specialized as to call themselves, sorry? Yeah, they're not as specialized as to call themselves, I'm a trademark practitioner. Kenyan lawyers are jacks of all trades, right? They are, in fact, this department would fall under commercial litigation. The high-end firms would probably have a department that caters to intellectual property, but this is the high-end firms. Mid-sized firms probably take on as much work as they can until they get to this point where they've got enough work to start choosing, picking the jobs that they can. So for the students I teach here at SLS, I tell them, you've got to know the broad-based law very well because you have no idea what you'll be working in when you start to work. Now, KIPI has patent agents, right? And patent agents at KIPI are not necessarily lawyers. I am right? They are not necessarily lawyers. Now, to be a trademark practitioner, you've got to be an advocate, right? So when you want to register your trademark, you've got to do it through a lawyer. It's registered, you've got it, you've got a registration certificate, and that means that if anyone registers a mark similar to yours, you can sue them. Now, one day in a course I will give, I don't know when, I will talk about trademarks and domain names. Because a lot of the businesses that young people now are starting are being registered online. And there's an interesting thing called cyber squatting that I do myself. And cyber squatting is where you try and guess at domains that will be popular. I've registered a few. lamuseafarers.co.ke, lamuxyz.co.ke, and you register them and you register them and you maintain, you service it every year, hoping that one day some poor guy is going to try and come and register your domain name. If you remember, just about 2007, when we had a presidential election and we had the fiasco of the orange parties, you remember there was Maisha Bora. Of course, ODM was Maisha Bora whichever way you looked at it, all right? So there was half Maisha Bora, the orange, and there was full Maisha Bora, orange. They were both orange, isn't it? The question was, after the vice president ran away with, I think, the half orange, he ran away with the half orange. And of course, Raila Odinga had to remain with a party that was orange, that the people identified with, the party that had campaigned in the 2005 referendum. So when Raila Odinga decides, I'm going to leave this party because this guy is being difficult, and he goes to see if he can get the registration for ODM, full orange, Maisha Bora, he realizes there is a funny guy who's not anything, but he's got the registration for ODM, Maisha Bora, full orange, right? So how do you buy him out? You can't now decide that you're going to ODM, Maisha Bora, apple. Most Kenyans have not eaten an apple. You're not going to be ODM, Maisha Bora, grapes. You've got to get the orange, full orange, isn't it? So what did he do? What did the Orange Party do? Who was around at that time? Before we started to fight, who was around? Those were still nice times. It had to be bought, isn't it? Now that's what cyber squatting is. Of course, trademarks and domain names, of course, if you have a registered trademark and somebody comes and tries to cyber squat on your domain, you just show your registration and the guy is told, forget it. This domain name belongs to this trademark owner. So as you guys begin to think, I want to set up a business and I want to do that, register your trademark, which then forms the basis for your domain name, because that way you're able to protect that particular aspect of your brand. Again, Dr. Felix Martin. So that's one way in which you're trying to build a business, and if you don't go the way of patents, and you want to go the way of building brands, you've got to take care of your trademarks, you've got to take care of your domain names, right? Okay, now, this is an important question, because a lot of people who come to us seeking advice, I look at them and after having listened for 10 minutes, I ask, one, do you really need an IP advisor? Because you've got all of 25,000 shillings in capital, right? And you want to register the patent. And I tell them, this cannot be done with the amount of money you've got. Now, for some of them, you've got to ask this question, or you've got to ask yourself this question, if you're in the innovation space or the creative industries, can I afford not to register my domain name? Can I afford not to register my trademark, right? This is a question, it's a good mental exercise as you're thinking about the thing that you have, the brand that you have. Do I register it or do I not register it? Now, I said, consider the advice that's out there for free first. So when you come to me at CIPIT, I don't work for free, right? Isaac doesn't work for free. Victor doesn't work for free. Carol doesn't work for free. I don't know a lawyer who works for free, all right? Any lawyer who works for free, and the ones who work for free, they work for civil society, and then civil society is not really free because somebody funds it, and on and on and on, as my students know, right? So the basic questions are this. Am I going to register a design or am I going to register a patent? Right? You don't need a lawyer for that. You need to go online and find out what a patent is, what a design is. This information is accessible to you. Of course, if you're 25 and below, I'm not speaking to you. I think you get this. If you're 30 and above, I'm probably speaking to you because you're fidgeting around and you don't know what's going on. So just go, trust yourself, right? Trust yourself. And the online environment won't bite, right? And those basic questions, you can find answers to. Is this a patent? Is this a trademark? Is this a copyright? At the point at which you've exhausted answers and you've gotten answers to the basic questions, now ask yourself this other question that I asked. Can I afford not to patent this thing? Can I afford not to copyright this thing? And now these are questions that are at the I'd like to say multidisciplinary, but this is the wrong word, at the intersection of intellectual property and business. Business. So you're beginning to make very strategic decisions about what it is you're going to do, right? Now, you're still thinking. Now, making money out of intellectual property isn't easy. It's also long-term, right? It's not fly-by-the-night sort of thing. It's long-term. It's well thought out. Positioning your brands. Like my cyber squatting domain names, I'm spending money on them, you see? And they may never come to anything. But one day, maybe when somebody comes with that Lamu Seafarers business, I have them, right? So you ask yourself, are you willing to do that kind of outlay? Or do you just want to go and buy land? Okay, it's surer, it's stable. My father says it never loses value, and people will always buy it, and so on and so forth. So IP does not exist in isolation. IP should be part and parcel of business strategy, right? Your brand is business strategy, so think about it, right? Now, we spend a lot of time talking to people who are concerned about the IP, but they've not thought about the business strategy afterwards. So after you have a patent, then what? So after you have a copyright, then what? Because the idea is not to wave it around and say, I have it. Well, if you work for Google, that's the idea. If you work for Facebook, that's the idea. But if you're a small developer with 500,000 shillings, that's probably not the idea. So although we talk about IP regimes, realize, as I'm saying, that they exist as part of a continuum. We're looking for IP so that we can monetize, so that we can make money, so that we can protect our assets. Now, what advice do I want? What advice do I want? Having worked at iHub, iLab, and now at CIPIT, I'd say that the most important advice you could give to anybody who's in innovation, to anybody who's trying to patent to anybody who has an interest in designs is commercialization strategy. Because, like I said, we are only interested in intellectual property so that we make some money. I think Dr. Mutai said yesterday, we're not interested in patenting anyway. It was a quote that he referred to. I'm not interested in patenting anything as long as there is no money in it, right? As a matter of fact, the fourth limb for issuing any patent at any self-respecting industrial property office is industrial applicability. Industrial applicability. What is industrially applicable, I don't know. But if it's commercializable, people then make the necessary conclusion that it has industrial applicability, right? Now, so again, this list I'm reading through here, do I register my mark? Do I patent this? The question is, all these things we're doing have to be linked with commercialization strategy. If they're not, if this is not what you're telling your client, and this is something perhaps we should talk to when we talk to CEOs, that your brand has a value, but your value's got to be put through in terms of your business strategy. And I think this is what Felix, you talked about in the morning, no? Okay. Now, another thing that the people who come here are interested in, and perhaps this is one good reason to have a patent, is the availability to get grants and soft loans and venture capital. Because, excuse me, I didn't get your name. This man, this gentleman, I didn't get your name. Sorry? Kibwage. The thing is, if intellectual property is a trade-off between capital and ideas, right? And one of the yet undeveloped markets here, or sectors that has to do with intellectual property, is venture capital. And venture capital is people who've got some money and that they're willing to put in as equity for someone who's got good ideas, who's got some good patent that they would like to commercialize, and they'll give equity for it with the possibility, obviously, that they're able to exit that business through the stock exchange or through any other device that's possible. Right now, we're trying to develop at the stock exchange something called a growth enterprise market. And maybe if we have it, then we'll attract more venture capital to the things that are happening at iLab, iHub, and the other innovation spaces around the country. Now, a lot of you who are considering intellectual property should be considering it in the sense of, if I have it, can I raise money? Now, Kenyan banks are extremely conservative in terms of the kind of products that they launch out there. Because before I had a proper job, when I was still living from hand to mouth, and in a sense I still am, when the banks wouldn't touch me, right? And then I started to have a decent income coming to my bank every month, and the banks start calling me for silly loans about cars and land, and I'm not interested, right? And of course, the young people coming out of school are also not interested, don't have the kind of money that makes your bank manager call you, right? They will call you if so a friend of mine likes to say, if last month's salary does not meet this month's salary, your bank manager shall not call you, right? Now, IP is essential if you're trying to approach a venture capitalist, right? If you've got a valuable patent that you've already got, then you can comfortably approach somebody who's got some money. There's a gentleman who came here earlier, and I missed it, and he said that he had an idea, he'd gone and copyrighted it, he talked to Safaricom, and then Safaricom, they kept quiet about it, and then 1 or 2 years later, he saw M-Pesa, right? Of course, this story, if this patent had been granted, I don't know if this patent had been granted, then without doubt, Safaricom would have had to sit down, right? If this is a progression of things as they happen, Safaricom would have had to sit down. Now, if this kind of thing had been possible in Kenya, that gentleman would be talking a very different story. He'd be here laughing and telling us, you see, patents work. But it's a good example of how an IP system can frustrate you if you're the middleman, if you're the small man down here, who's creative, who's got ideas, but you're not very sure where to go, right? The space I'm working in now is this idea that let's try and get the patents that and copyrights and trademarks and designs that work for us to try and leverage on venture capital, right? If you think when you've got some good ideas that may not happen, I'd rather you concentrate on what Felix talked about, build a brand.
be the first in the market. Like CIPIT is the first in the market. And then in 2 months' time, we'll have some copycats, but we are the first in the market. You know what I mean, right? Now, that discussion between venture capitalists, between the innovator, between the lawyer, is a very focused discussion. And you, as the guy who's the innovator, you must be very clear what it is that you do want. You must be very clear what IP regime you want to rely on. You'll now be asking very pointed and clever questions about how to commercialize, right? How to better protect, and how to better sell out equity for value. Are we together? Now, you could have gone to CIPIT, you could have gone to your lawyers, you could have gone to, what is that other place? And then you have realizations that the real place that you'll come and they won't cheat you will be. Thank you.